Good evening. My name is Joseph Sipitz, and I'm here for the St. Joseph County Public Library, and it's time for Saturday Night Stories. Tonight I'm going to be reading from F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby, a library book. And I'm doing this because there's a quote from this book that came up in the news a couple of days ago. And the context was talking about how some of the folks in government who have got money and serve the people of money and seem to forget about the struggles of others. And when trouble happens, it ends up hurting the people, and then they just retreat back to their money. So that's the context is it's actually the end of the book. So if you haven't read the book, you probably, and you think you're going to, you might want to stop this. But if you had read it, you'll probably go, oh yeah. So this is at the end of the book. The action just before this scene is that you have Tom and Daisy Buchanan, who are a married couple, and with some money. You have Jay Gatsby, who is striving to be a good businessman and earn better. He is somebody who also loved Daisy, but unfortunately was not good enough for her. And now, a little later on, now that he's made some money, he is trying to win her back with some success. There's also Nick Carraway, who's the narrator, and then you have Myrtle Wilson, who is Tom Buchanan's squeeze on the side, let's say. So, Daisy is driving Gatsby's car, and she runs over Myrtle Wilson and kills her. Myrtle had just run into the street for no particularly good reason. So, and then Tom Buchanan tells Mr. Wilson that it was Gatsby's car. And then Mr. Wilson then turns around and goes and kills Gatsby. Boom, end of story. But you've got this little bit at the end that I think is something that would be worth hearing in this context. So here we go. One afternoon late in October, I saw Tom Buchanan. He was walking ahead of me on Fifth Avenue in his alert, aggressive way, with his hands out from his body as if to fight off interference, his head moving sharply here and there, adapting himself to his restless eyes. Just as I slowed up to avoid overtaking him, he stopped and began frowning into the window of a jewelry store. Suddenly he saw me and walked back, holding out his hand. "What's the matter, Nick? Do you object to shaking hands with me?" "Yes, you know what I think of you." "You're crazy, Nick," he said quickly. "Crazy as hell. I don't know what's the matter with you." "Tom," I inquired, "what did you say to Wilson that afternoon?" He stared at me without a word, but I knew I had guessed right about those missing hours. I started to turn away, but then he took a step after me and grabbed my arm. "I told him the truth," he said. "He came to the door while we were getting ready to leave, and when I sent down word that we weren't in, he tried to force his way upstairs. He was crazy enough to kill me if I hadn't told him who owned that car. His hand was on his revolver in his pocket every minute he was in the house." He broke off defiantly. "What if I did tell him? That fellow had it coming to him. He threw dust into your eyes just as he did Daisy's, but he was a tough one. He ran over Myrtle like you'd run over a dog and never even stopped his car." There was nothing I could say except the one unutterable fact that it wasn't true. "And if you think I didn't have my share of suffering, look here. When I went to give up that flat and saw that damn box of dog biscuits sitting there on the sideboard, I sat down and cried like a baby. By God, it was awful. I couldn't forgive him or like him, but I saw that what he had done was, to him, entirely justified. It was all very careless and confused. They were careless people. Tom and Daisy, they smashed up things and creatures and then retreated back into their money or their vast carelessness or whatever it was that kept them together and let other people clean up the mess they had made. I shook hands with him. It seemed silly not to, for I felt suddenly as though I was talking to a child. Then he went into the jewelry store to buy a pearl necklace, or perhaps only a pair of cuff buttons, rid of my provincial squeamishness forever. Gatsby's house was still empty when I left. The grass on his lawn had grown as long as mine. One of the taxi drivers in the village never took a fare past the entrance gate without stopping for a minute and pointing inside. Perhaps it was he who drove Gatsby and Daisy over to East Egg that night of the accident, or perhaps he had made a story about it all on his own. I didn't want to hear it, and I avoided him when I got off the train. I spent my Saturday nights in New York because those gleaming, dazzling parties of his, Gatsby's, were with me so vividly that I could still hear the music and the laughter, faint and incessant, from his garden, and those cars going up and down the drive. One night I did hear a material car there, and I saw its lights stop at the front steps, but I didn't investigate. Probably it was some final guest who had been away at the ends of the earth and didn't know that the party was over. On the last night, when my trunk packed and my car sold to the grocer, I went over and looked at that huge, incoherent failure of a house one more time. On the white steps, an obscene word scrawled by some boy with a piece of brick stood out clearly in the moonlight. I erased it, drawing my shoe raspingly across the stone. Then I wandered down to the beach and sprawled out on the sand. Most of the big shore places were closed now, and there were hardly any lights except the shadowy moving glow of a ferry boat across the sound. And as the moon rose higher and essential houses began to melt away until gradually I became aware of the old island here that flowered once for the Dutch sailor's eyes, the fresh green breast of a new world. In vanished trees, the trees that had made way for Gatsby's house had once pandered in whispers to the last and greatest of all human dreams. For a transitory, enchanted moment, man must have held his breath in the presence of this continent, compelled into an aesthetic contemplation he neither understood nor desired, face to face for the last time in history with something commensurate to his capacity for wonder. And as I sat there brooding on the old, unknown world, I thought of Gatsby's wonder when he first picked out the green light at the end of Daisy's dock. He had come a long way to this blue lawn, and his dream must have seemed so close that he could hardly fail to grasp it. He did not know that it was already behind him, somewhere back in that vast obscurity behind the city, where the dark fields of the Republic rolled on under the night. Gatsby believed in the green light, the orgiastic future that year by year recedes before us. It eluded us then, but that's no matter. Tomorrow we will run faster, stretch out our arms farther, and then one fine morning. So we beat on, boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past. Good night.